however you'd like.
Okay.
You want to be close enough so that we can hear you, but not so close that you're breathing on it. So, but you'll do fine. Okay. Go ahead and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to provide is true and accurate?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Jorde?
Thank you. Please state your name.
Bonnie Peters.
And Ms. Peters, are you a landowner of property in Shelby County that's being targeted by the Summit proposed hazardous pipeline?
Yes, my husband and I are.
And does your husband also farm ground owned by Sherry Webb, Cynthia Hansen, and their siblings that is also being targeted for this proposed pipeline?
Yes, we do.
And have you caused to be pre-filed testimony in this matter along with certain exhibits and documents?
Yes, I have.
If we were to walk through all of those same questions you were asked in your pre-filed testimony, would the answers you would give here today be substantially similar?
Yes. Yes.
Do you have any updates or corrections you believe are material for the board to know?
I don't think so, no.
We would offer exhibits 361 and 620.
Are there objections?
No objections, Your Honor.
Seeing no objections, the board will admit.
Thank you. And at this time, I'm going to tender you for cross-examination questions.
Okay.
Mr. Taylor?
Thank you. Ma'am, I'm Wally Taylor. I represent the Sierra Club.
Hi.
And so just to be clear, you have the property just north of the Webb Hansen property?
Correct, right across the road.
And I think we heard from their testimony that there's a hog confinement operation on your property?
Yes, and we have two parcels that go south to north, and there is a hog confinement building on there. My husband and I built it, and now our son has bought it and taken over, and so yes, that's his.
Okay, maybe we pull up the KMZ and we'll take a look at that. Okay, does this appear to be your property?
Yes, yes.
And the area on the south edge of your property, is that where the CAFO is? Or
So that's a picture of the hog barn. That's the driveway coming to the road.
when I say CAFO, I mean confined animal feeding operation. Right?
Yes.
Okay. And does that appear to be where you understand the Summit pipeline route would be along the west edge of your property?
Correct.
If there were a rupture in that pipeline, if it's built, how would that impact your hog confinement operation?
It would basically destroy it. Our measurements, we're guessing it's like 300 to 350 feet from the pipeline. So if that exploded, it would engulf the whole barn. And my son is there every single day, several hours. My husband goes there to help him. If Aaron takes a day off, then there's another young man in there. If any of them are in there working when it explodes, they would have no idea what even happened because the noise in there with the fans running and the hogs and everything, they would never hear it. So it would not only take their life, it would take all the hogs too. You got over 2,000 head of hogs in there. So would it impact them? It would impact us beyond belief. If we lost a family member is unfathomable. And then the substantial financial risk, if something like that happened, there would be no way to recover from that.
So there are 2,499 hogs in there?
2,400, yes.
Let me ask you this. When did you first learn about the Summit project?
The same as everyone else, about 2 years ago. we got the flyer in the mail. And then we went to that first informational meeting in Harlan also to try and get a little more information about it.
And did you meet with any summit agents right after that meeting, or was it sometime later?
Time-wise, I won't say specifically. Probably, within the next month or so, someone came out to the house, caught my husband out on the yard, farm, and talked to them. And then he said I wasn't home, so she did come back and talk to me, or tried to talk to me for a little bit.
But there was no initial call to set up a meeting. They just showed up?
Right, they just showed up.
Okay. So did you talk to any agents at that time?
When I talked to her, I mean, she was very nice, and I said, I understand, this is your job, but just so you know, we're totally against this, and we always will be, and that's just how it is.
So did you have any follow-up conversations or contacts with summit agents?
Someone came around, I don't know, at least once more and talked to my husband a little bit. We had maybe one phone message that I can remember on a voicemail answering machine. And he said, I understand you're against the project, but can we talk to you? And then we would get several phone calls, out of area numbers, but nobody ever left a message. And the few times I did pick up, there was never anybody there. So whether it was them or not, I don't know.
So did you ever have any conversations with summit agents or representatives about an easement or about the route of the pipeline?
No. We got, something in the mail, but never anybody in person talked about it, as far as I know.
Okay. Aside from the hog confinement building, are there any other occupied structures in the area around your property?
Yes, up the hill to the west, there's a family that lives up there. And then if you go down the hill from the hog barn, there's Silver Creek, and then right across the half field there is another hog barn. And then north of us, there's Good Neighbors, close by too. So, there.
If there were a rupture in the pipeline, where would be the closest emergency response personnel?
Well, Shelby, a small town, is roughly 7 miles to the south, but they're not equipped for anything like this. It's a volunteer fire department. Again, excellent. They're great at their job, but this is just beyond their scope. I understand Harlan would be the hazmat team that would show up. The extent that they can handle this, I don't know. Otherwise, we would have to go to Des Moines for the major hazmat department.
Thank you. That's all the questions I think I have.
Thank you.
Ms. Kaufman?
Hi, Mrs. Peters. Julie Kaufman. I had a question about I assume because you have a hog operation that you need a lot of water for your hogs.
Correct.
Is there a good water? I mean, are you worried about the water situation on your farm if this were to go through?
Yes, actually, very much concerned. We do have a well for the hogs, which with the drought that we've been in, that water table is going down. The creek is down probably lower than we've seen ever, maybe. And the amount of water that they're saying they're going to be pulling for this is unbelievable. And we're on the rural water system, which we've been on the yellow alert for the past 2 years already, limiting because of the drought situation. So how can they pull more water from our aquifers when we're depending on that just to live, just for our houses, and occasionally livestock situations? and then they're gonna pull it for this. I just don't understand that.
So, excuse me, so aside from your own family and the other families that are affected by this, do you think that this water situation should be a concern for all Iowans?
Absolutely. Everyone's aquifers across the state are down, and they're going to keep going down. They don't replenish in 1 year, even 2 years, and then you're going to be draining them to do this type of project. Just does not make sense, in my opinion.
Do you think that most Iowans are aware of this?
I don't think so, unless you're involved in this personally. I don't think a lot of people are even aware of what's the full scope of it is.
Have you heard any of the ads from Summit on the radio or other places?
I've heard them propose that they are safe and that sort of thing, yeah.
Do they ever mention any risks at all to anyone?
No.
So you think that the public, the general public, is pretty much in the dark about whether or not this is a hazardous, they don't know that it's a hazardous situation. Is that your thought?
I do believe they don't know the full scope of the whole project, yes.
I don't have any other questions.
Thank you.
Ms. Greenhick?
Hi, Mrs. Peters. My name is Chris Greenhagen. I'm with the Iowa Farm Bureau, and I just have one question for you. On pages 2 to 4, you testify about the potential catastrophic effect on your son's operation.
Yes.
So, if the pipeline is constructed, and in the event of the rupture or of a rupture near the hog barn, has your family estimated the dollar amount of the potential loss to the hog operation?
I've not actually put the dollar figures to it, but if it's full, which it normally is, I mean, if there's over 2,000 head of hogs, it depends if they're market weight, or not, of course, that too. But it would be catastrophic no matter what size the hogs are. And you can't, liability insurance is not possible. The insurance company said, well, if something happens, we'll look at it and try and determine at that point, who's responsible. Well, then you get in the legal battle, this insurance and that insurance, and we don't have the resources to fight that kind of a legal battle, and he, of course, doesn't. So I don't understand how eminent domain can force us to live in that situation with that constant threat of losing everything. Or losing our son. I mean, how can you do that?
So if Summit was required to carry insurance to cover your loss, you haven't quantified that at this point, what that might be.
Correct, but then how can you trust that, They say they will, but when it comes down to it, you never know until it boils out in the end, and it's always going to be our fault. We drove on it too much, it was too wet, you were out there, you damaged it somehow, it's always going to come back to us in the end.
Thank you for your time. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Ms. Colas?
Good afternoon, Ms. Peters. I just have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Do you think that PHMSA should issue new guidelines and safety standards before the IUB makes a decision?
From what I understand, that is their purpose, is to set safety issues and security regulations and oversee everything. And if that is the case, I definitely think they should wait for their guidelines, yes.
Are you aware that several congressmen have issued a letter or drafted a letter to President Biden to put this on moratorium?
State your objection, please.
Relevance. I don't know what this witness's awareness of a letter from Congress to PHMSA has to do with an issue before this board. It ultimately is a legal question. A letter does not speak for Congress. Congress speaks through acts. And again, I don't see what a particular witness's opinion or knowledge of that letter has to do with any relevant issue.
Ms. Colas, do you want to respond to the objection?
I'll redirect. Do you know that Congress has drafted a letter to President Biden that What's your objection?
Same objection.
So the objection wasn't to how you phrased that, it was the question at all, and the letter is not in the record, is that correct?
Actually, I believe the letter is in the record at this point, right?
Well, the letter is in the record, but I don't believe it's under this witness, is that correct?
Yes, I think that's correct.
Okay. So,
Okay, I thought I could bring it up because it was posted on the IUB.
ideally, cross-examination is used to flesh out this witness's pre-filed testimony from the usually opposing party. It's not typically used to build upon, it's not typically used to just repeat their testimony or bring in new testimony.
Okay, I have one more question. Does my memory serve me correctly that Hardin County is one of the counties that passed an ordinance with setbacks?
You say Hardin County?
Yeah.
I'm
The
not
Board of
sure, we're from
Supervisors?
Shelby County,
Okay.
and Shelby County does have an ordinance, yes.
No further questions, thank you.
Mr. Dublinsky.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Peters. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss an opportunity to find out about the hearing exhibit that you filed just last week, Exhibit 620. It appears to just be a series of a couple of photos of farm implements, and I was wondering what the intent of that exhibit was.
Basically just to show the size of equipment, that we do have that would be on the farm ground and would be potentially, crossing the pipeline. And is the pipeline prepared for that? Is it going to handle that?
And are you aware that those engineering considerations are taken into account by both the regulators and by Summit?
Foundation.
Your Honor, if we could pass out what I believe is Summit Hearing Exhibit 3.
Is that filed electronically, Mr. Dublinsky?
It is not, but it will be. We didn't know if it was going to get used or when. We will file that electronically promptly.
Chuck will bring you a copy soon.
I think so. Were there 3 or 4? I don't think it's got a number on it. Okay. And my apologies. I'm informed that we are higher on exhibit numbers than I realized. So why don't we mark this for identification as Summit Hearing Exhibit 5.
Mr. Taylor, Mr. Jorde, just let me know when you're ready. Yeah, go ahead. I just wanted to let you know we're ready for your input.
Okay, so Mr. Dublinsky's comments were telling. He said this wasn't previously made part of the record in their case in chief because he didn't know when it was going to be used. Well, he's the only one trying to use it in Landowner's case. So first of all, it's late disclosed. It's should have been in their case in chief. It's not sur rebuttal through this particular witness. Whoever Lake Superior Consulting isn't on the witness list, not even as sur rebuttal. None of the people are here, so it lacks foundation. It is hearsay. It's not relevant. These folks aren't here to be cross-examined on any of the metrics or methodology, if any, in this document. And ultimately, it's simply not an appropriate offer through this witness simply because she made the comment she's concerned about equipment going back and forth on her property.
Your Honor, I'm actually somewhat surprised Mr. Jorde made it through that with a straight face, given the other evidentiary discussions that we've had earlier this morning. This certainly didn't need to be part of our direct. Many of the witnesses for the opposition have raised this issue. We can cross on this issue, and in fact, this is more appropriate than, for example, Ms. Wiskus's document that was an attachment to a totally unrelated witness that was allowed in this morning with zero foundation, less reason to believe it was credible than this document. And it's less appropriate on direct, where they have much more control, than it is on cross. The board has accepted on direct cases, late filed, all kinds of, probably literally thousands of pages of documents at this point with less foundation, less relevance, less credibility than this document. And cross is normally given more leeway than direct. So I see no way that the board can suddenly change its tune and say, well, we're not going to allow this sort of thing in now, when it has been for the last 6 weeks.
Okay, Mr. Jorde, your objections, all of them are noted. Mr. Long.
I would like to echo some of what Mr. Jorde said, and I'd also ask Mr. Dublinsky to explain why it couldn't have been in Summit's rebuttal testimony, if, as he mentioned, various other parties have mentioned equipment loading. I believe at least some of them mentioned it in their pre-filed testimony. I have concerns. This is valuable. This could be very valuable evidence, but I have concerns with it coming in late like this, especially if the board is to rely on it for anything other than presumably Mr. Dublinsky would want to use it to impeach this witness. But if the board were to try to rely on it for facts, I think other parties would need to be given an opportunity to respond after having time to review it.
And Ms. Colas, did you want to weigh in too?
Well, I have just a question. I'm not really technical, but I'm not seeing offhand how this, the weight and all this blah, blah. But how, I'm sorry, how much, I don't see anything that analyzes the compaction once the soil has been disturbed.
Thank you, Ms. Colas. Your objection is noted as well. Thank you. Mr. Taylor, blah, blah.
I join in the blah, blah. But seriously, I agree with Mr. Jorde that although the board has let in some evidence and documents from landowners that perhaps because of their inexperience, their emotion about the issues and the burden's not on the landowners, the burden's on Summit in this case. And certainly this is a document that obviously Summit had prepared for them by a consulting firm, which allegedly is an expert, and Summit presented their expert testimony their technical evidence, their attempt at least to carry their burden in their initial prepared testimony and their prepared rebuttal testimony. This certainly could have been entered then, and it's just this kind of technical document with no foundation, no explanation, I think just goes too far in being admissible at this point.
Your Honor, to address some of that, I honestly can't tell you off the top of my head whether in the tens of thousands of pages of pre-filed testimony from opponents this issue was raised, but it certainly has been raised repeatedly after we had rested our direct case, and in fact, this exhibit that it's responsive to was filed just last week, 2 months after the testimony deadline. So if that can be filed showing a bunch of large equipment to talk about the impact on September 28th, surely it can't be too late for us to file it now. As Mr. Long alluded to, for impeachment, it's one of those, first year evidence things. Virtually anything can come in to impeach on cross, and that's not even taking into account the relaxed evidentiary standards of the administrative hearing. The board knows this issue has come up repeatedly just in the last couple weeks. We should have a full opportunity to address it. One way to do that is on cross. That's perfectly permissible. This board has let in much more questionable evidence than this.
Ms. Kaufman.
Well, as you've said before, we here are not, most of us, these guys up here are lawyers, but the rest of us aren't, and she certainly is not a lawyer either, and so we don't really know what's admissible, what's not admissible. We just are trying to tell our stories, and it seems like that they're like saying, no, we can tell our story, but you guys can't. It seems that way to me.
Go ahead.
So, insofar as this is purported to be some type of, I guess, testimony based on what allegedly are electronic signatures, the requirement for any type of testimony rebuttal obviously is to be accompanied by an affidavit. So it fails in that regard if that's what this is purported to be. So that's also an additional reason it should be denied.
This is not testimony. This is simply a cross-examination exhibit that the board can give whatever weight it's worth. And with response to Ms. Kaufman, I am certainly sympathetic to what she says with regard to her position. But most of the time this issue has come up, it's come up through a represented party. And again, while the landowners may have limited experience with this sort of process, Mr. Jorde does not lack experience.
Okay, so unless somebody needs to get something else on the record for later purposes, we are going to admit and give it the weight due. If, however, someone feels they need something else on the record for a future argument, now would be the time to slip that in. Otherwise, we would like to go on badly.
Well, I appreciate that offer. We would request that the hearing then be continued to develop witnesses, professional witnesses to rebut this document.
Your Honor, that is obviously absurd at this point. Mr. Jorde and other witnesses have put on all kinds of technical things, questionable, charts with no particular origin noted of impacts of various levels of CO2, blah, 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 to continue in that vein. And no one's continuing the hearing for those things. We're already going to have to continue the hearing simply because of all of the friendly cross that side engaged in. That's just a crazy suggestion. We should just move on, let this in like we have everything else, and I can do a few quick questions and we'll be done.
Okay. Mr. Taylor.
It's very briefly. it seems to me the problem here from my perspective is that this is improper cross-examination. To use a technical report this witness obviously has no knowledge of and has no ability to even respond to, even if she had seen this a month ago. And that's the problem, it seems to me. This is the wrong way to put this into evidence.
Your Honor, if all the opposing parties will stipulate that they will not use comments or exhibits after the close of Summit's case to argue about the fact that farm equipment is big and heavy these days, what I really hear the argument is that somehow the applicant shouldn't get the last word, that they should get to come in again behind us. We're responding to comments made in their case. We're entitled to do that.
Okay. Mr. Jorde's motion.
I just have one more question. A statement. I think it's very important pertaining to the weight and the safety of this pipeline. I think it's very relevant.
Okay, so initially you objected to the inclusion of the evidence. Now you're not. Just getting it clear for you.
I think there should be some further discussion and other witnesses.
Okay. Mr. Jorde's objections are noted to the evidence. Your motion is denied. Mr. Dubinsky, please continue. And thank you. Didn't know you were going to get a show today, did you?
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Peters, I'll make this quick. Would you agree with me that this report is titled Equipment Loading Analysis Ag Fields?
Yes, that's what it says.
And if we turn to pages 6 and 7, would you agree that there are some pictures in there of some large equipment, perhaps not the same equipment in your pictures, but similarly large farm equipment?
Yes, there's pictures there.
And if we turn to page 24, would you agree with me that that page is titled Conclusions?
Yes, that's what it says.
And if you go down to the bolded passage in the middle of that, it says that LSC, in this case Lake Superior Consulting, does not recommend any additional mitigation methods for temporary crossings of equipment investigated in this report, correct?
I'm sorry, where was that at?
And so that was on page 24, the second half of the bolded passage there.
Thank you.
It just says the consultant does not recommend any additional mitigation methods, correct?
Yes, that's what it says.
And I understand that there have been objections and concerns raised about this, but do you have any reason to disagree if I say, as I asked you before, engineers look at this sort of issue about large equipment around a pipeline? Would you agree that's what this appears to be?
That's what it looks like it is, yeah.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Move to admit Summit Hearing Exhibit 5.
All the same, or just repeat all the same prior objections.
Thank you. I see placards up. Are we objecting?
Can we comment on this since we just get to see it now?
No. You can object to it being admitted.
Okay.
Okay.
We've all objected, I think, so far.
Okay. The board will admit and give it the weight due.
Can I, is Mr. Dubinsky offering this as sort of, as evidence the board could rely on for the matters discussed, or was he simply offering it to impeach the witness?
I'm offering it in evidence for whatever use is relevant in this case.
I'm not going to object to its admission, but I believe quite strongly that if it's admitted for the board to rely on in sort of any way it needs to in its decision, then the other parties need to be given an opportunity to respond after they've had a chance to review it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Copper?
Is this, does this mean that liability wise, does this affect liability or no? I mean, because
This is just
does
whether...
this mean someone is taking responsibility for these things that are in here? If they have a similarly large thing, that someone takes responsibility for that?
I'm going to let Mr. Dublinsky speak for his client and his...
I just don't know. That means that someone is taking responsibility for large equipment going over
It's
the
okay.
pipeline.
It's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is offered to show that the issue of large and heavy equipment is given engineering analysis, and for the results that were just walked through with the witness with regard to the conclusion of that analysis with regard to large equipment operating over the pipeline in normal farming activities.
But it doesn't mean that they're...
Okay,
I don't know.
we have admitted it. It will be given the weight due. Everyone has, all objections and qualifications have been noted. I think we've exhausted the possible objections. And so with that, does somebody... We were ready for Mr. What? Other questions from the board? Okay, so with that, Mr. Jorde on redirect.
All right. Well, now I've got questions. You notice on Summit Hearing Exhibit 5 on the front page it says final report. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. And you know, throughout this long process, there's been discovery back and forth and asking for documents. Would you be surprised to learn that there's never been a draft report or initial report, and nothing from this Lake Superior Consulting Group has ever been produced before a few minutes ago?
No, that wouldn't surprise me.
And then the submittal date on the front page says October 2nd. So do you agree it appears to be that this was just created recently?
Looks that way.
And then Mr. Dublinsky had said that they were responding to you, but your exhibit simply showed pictures of equipment, didn't it?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, and then he actually asked you the question of why you had those equipment there, which created his opportunity to then offer this exhibit. Isn't that right?
Yes.
All right, so you never brought up
No.
that issue. Okay. Then if we can go to the fourth page, there's something called an executive summary. It's got 3 paragraphs. I want you to look at the third paragraph at the bottom there. So would you agree, it says, quote, however, if repetitive crossing traffic is to occur in the same location for extended durations, that is, beyond normal farming activities, it would be recommended that additional mitigation methods be assessed for any crossing with a calculated stress of 85% SMYS or greater. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Would you be surprised to learn that nowhere in this document does it define normal farming activities?
Yes, and how can that be defined? Who's normal and what's normal activity for you is not normal for the neighbor.
And would you be surprised to learn there's no definition of what repetitive crossing traffic means?
No, I'm not surprised.
And would you be surprised to learn there's no definition in this document of what extended duration means?
No, I'm not.
In the first paragraph, on the last sentence, it says that, quote, geotechnical reports, obtained by SCS for horizontal directional drill, HDDs, were reviewed by LSC, and then it goes on. Are you aware that Summit hasn't completed all the geotechnical surveys that it needs?
I'm not aware of that, no.
And then if we turn to page 24, which Mr. Dublinsky asked you to take a look at, that's the conclusion section. There's a bold sentence in the second paragraph, and I believe Mr. Dublinsky read that. Do you see that paragraph?
Yes, yes.
And again, in the third sentence down, it says methods for temporary crossings. What would you be surprised to learn? There's no definition of what a temporary crossing is.
I'm not surprised there's no definition, no.
And I suppose when you farm on your ground, you don't just cross the area of where the proposed pipeline would be once, do you?
No, multiple times, of course.
Multiple times, when you plant, when you harvest, when you're out for repairs, and year after year, is that right?
Correct.
And is farm equipment getting smaller or bigger?
Larger.
Do you suspect that will continue?
Yes, I do.
And then the second sentence in the second paragraph says, quote, however, comma, I think this is the same sentence. If repetitive crossing traffic is to occur at the same location, and then it goes on with all the qualifiers we read in the executive summary, correct?
Correct, yes.
Is there any, as you've been able to just look through this document, do you see any indication of how much money Summit paid Lake Superior Consulting to prepare this report for them?
Well, obviously it wasn't put together quickly. They put time into it, yes. So, yeah, I don't know.
All right. And so given that it draws conclusions on multiple undefined terms, would you agree with me the appropriate place to file this is in the trash can?
Yes.
All right, good. Let's do that. Now, I had a couple other questions for you. If we could look at the KMZ map, please. Okay, can we get a distance from the hog barn, please, to the proposed route? All right, does that say 687 feet, I think? Okay, is that about the distance you thought it was?
Well, we actually thought it was a little closer than that, but yes.
Okay. All right, well, does the fact it's approximately 687 feet away make you feel any better?
No, it's still terrifying. I can't imagine living with that every day.
And has Summit discussed with you either in writing or orally in person on the phone why they can't move the route further away from that hog barn?
No, they've never talked to us about why the route is where it is or how it could be different, no.
You were asked or came up that you've heard radio ads of how safe and wonderful this project is, but yet you've learned Summit repeatedly fails to release the plume and risk analysis as well as safety information to first responders. Are you able to reconcile those two things in your own mind?
No, I'm not, because it doesn't, if there's nothing to worry about, they would show us, they would let us know, if it's this amount of feet, you're going to be fine, because we've proven, test after test, it's this way. But they won't show us that, because obviously they don't want us to know. So there must be a reason they don't want us to know, otherwise they would tell us.
Thank you, nothing further.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Peters. Appreciate that. Ms. Jorde, next witness.
Yes, Dan Wall.